Thanks be to God. Well, happy Father's Day. Today is all about the Father. And I am so grateful to be here and blessed to have the Father that I had throughout my life and still am able to have with me on this day with you. I've thought about the letters of Father. Maybe you'll want to do this yourself if you have a pencil or later at home, but making an acronym out of the word Father. And so when I think of my own father, my own earthly father, and my heavenly Father, I think of these things, the F standing for faith. Faith in the Lord and faith in Jesus, but also faith in his family and faith in his friends and even faith in his foes, that things will turn out. And a father of action, just like many of you, you remember the actions that your father took to protect and to fight for you, as we heard in Deuteronomy, and carry you when you could not walk on your own, and provide for you. The time that a father spends, and I have been blessed with much time with my father. The father who's the helper, who comforts and assists when you're in need. A father who sets an example. And a father who is respected and reliable. So those are some of the words I came up with, and you probably have your own words to spell out Father. Sometimes this day, though, I think of my father, and I have really good feelings, but some people this day may be very painful. Painful because maybe of a recent loss. They're still grieving the loss of their father, or grieve today. Maybe they've been estranged all their lives from their father or never knew their father, natural father. Maybe they were abused by their father. The hand was not a kind hand. Maybe you've always wanted to be a father and are not. I think of my situation. I was not only blessed with a good father, but I look out at Sally Husky, and every time I see her, I can't not think about Bob and how he was like a father to me when I went out to get my first job at the IGA. And I was just thinking, one of the things he told me is, now you need to memorize that Social Security number. So I did, and it's been valuable to me ever since that day. It actually caused me to pay a few taxes, but other than that, I will say it was good advice as well as many other things. And so those that, in terms of a natural father, I think that, in thinking of these things, it's an obligation that we all have to each other, regardless of our gender. And that is to carry out some of these things that we know our Holy Father provides. But how can we do this for each other on earth? So I want to look at this particular story today, the prodigal son story, a little closer with you, because it illustrates the power of the Father's love and the greatness of a Father's love. It paints a picture, and that's what Jesus was doing for the Pharisees, because he'd been, unnaturally inviting all these sinners to hear his word, or helping them, setting an example or instructing them. So he was talking to the Pharisees. At the same time, this paints such a beautiful picture of our Father. There are three main characters in this story, the father and the two sons. And when I read this story, I can identify with all three. And maybe you can too. Even though I'm female, I can identify with every male in this story, because the things that it tells here is really a story of humanity. It's a story of our weaknesses. It's a story of our self-indulgence. It's a story of our selfishness. It's a story which was not read here, but as you probably recall, the brothers' rage and anger and jealousy. The story of humility, the story of shamefulness, the story of sin, the story of grace and compassion and unconditional love. Our Holy Father only plays, although we may all see ourselves in the three characters, our Holy Father only plays one character, and that is the Father of this story, because of his perfectness. So this story starts, and we see, as we start out, with Jesus continuing to tell his story, and he said there was a young man who had two sons, and the younger one said to his father, "Give me my share of the estate." Now, if you're sitting here as a father here, and you think about one of your children just coming up while you're still alive saying, "I want my share," I don't think that would go well for me. It's a very sort of greedy, selfish thing to say, right? Something that didn't acknowledge how much his father had worked to make such a resourceful place for him. Now think about that. Can you identify with that? How about our whole world, where God has placed this beautiful world full of resources that we seem to easily waste away? So what does the father say when he tells him this? The son comes up, "Mister, I don't need you anymore. Dad, I got to get away from you. I don't want to be under your restraints, under your authority. I want to live the way I want, and I want your money to do it." And the most surprising thing is what? The father says, "Okay. Okay." There's that free will. You have this. I give it to you. You do what you will with it. And we know later that the one son stayed, and that's what he chose to do with it. But this child, this boy, decided he was going to go off to a distant country, load up, and he was going to spend it on wild living. Life of insanity. Life of, we think of this story mostly about money, right? He spends up all the money. But it really tells a story of what we all do, and that's self-indulge. Dad was pointing out to me last night, we were looking at some of the CDs that they don't need anymore, and he was reminding me how many CDs he couldn't believe I bought in my life, right? And now we're pitching them out the window because we have MP3s or whatever. Whether we're close to home to our fathers or in a distant country, we still can identify with self-indulgence, can't we? And so that story is not just about money, it's about living how we want, maybe without regards to certain rules. Living wildly, insanely, maybe not as crazy as this particular son is painted, but still, all are with sin. So first we hear of this self-indulgence and this thing that he did, and after he had spent everything. And then there was a famine on top of it, because you can't always expect what will happen next. Maybe there'll be some friends around that pull you out. But in this story, no one was there. He had lived through it all. He was desolate. And not just from the lack of money. That's another theme about this story. It's not just about spending the money. It's about his separation from the love that his father and family could bring him and his friends could bring him, because they weren't there now. Remember, he went on to hire out in that country just to make a buck, to feed himself. And he ended up feeding the pigs. Now, I used to have to do that all the time, too. Maybe you had to feed a few pigs. It's not really that pretty there. It's a little stinky, as you may recall, if you ever fed the pigs. They're much nastier than cattle, and they have a horrible grunting sound. And I used to remember putting on Dad's big goggle boots, or whatever you call them, rubber boots. They come up to my knees and get out there and try to feed him and all that, whatever. And so it was a lowly job, but he didn't have a choice. He was so hungry. He was thinking about eating what those pigs were eating. Now, can you imagine that? If you've ever seen a pig's nose, nostril, what do you call them, snouts, get into that food, you would not want to touch that, right? But that's how hungry he was. It shows his despair. It shows his depression. He was away from everything. And so glad to think. It says he came to his senses. Has that ever happened to you? You came to your senses? One version says he came unto himself. He came to himself. Things became more clear to him. He had clarity. Maybe you've had a son or a daughter, or you yourself, who you worried about constantly because they had not yet come to themselves. But you were given the great blessing that they did. They finally realized, I had things pretty good at home. My mama was good. My dad was good. I even had friends. Even some of the people I didn't like kind of like me more than the folks here do. I think I'll go back home. But then we have that thing that sometimes, despite all the wild living, the craziness, the insanity, we have that thing then that hits us. Okay, now I feel ashamed. Now I realize that all this fun, separation from everything I did, and now I'm ashamed. How do you go back if you feel ashamed? A very human emotion that you all have felt at some point. Shame, regardless of the circumstance, whether it happens with a father, mother, family, or friends, there's shame because there he was. He had not done what his father had hoped for him. His father saw greatness in him. And this little episode was not him fulfilling what his father had hoped for him. So he felt shame. But when you're at the very bottom, like this guy, you may not be prepared to die. And so at the bottom, with his shame, he made his plan. Remember his plan? He's going to walk back in his raggedy condition. Can you imagine what he looked and smelled like with the pigs? His stomach was empty. And his plan was that he knew that he was not worthy to be the son. He had disgraced his dad Imagine what his neighbors said to the dad after the dad gave him this money and the kid goes off and just wasted away. The neighbors were probably like, And we know what the brother was like. My worthless brother, that lowlife. But he was prepared to humble himself. And you've all done that too, huh? A place where you maybe were once proud and now you feel humble. And he was prepared to go back because he remembered how full the glass was back at home. It was full. It was overflowing, and now his cup was empty. And he needed not only food and clothing, but he needed love, didn't he? Like we all need love. And so he has this plan to, tell his dad how he dishonored him and how sorry he was, and to please just let me be your servant. I gave up the son stuff. I get that. I gave it all up in this choice. But just let me serve you. Let me serve you. And so he starts his walk back. And as he gets closer to home, but he's still far off. And that verse, I want to read it because this is my favorite part of the story. And I think I've heard the prodigal son story 1,000,000 times, just like you. But I forgot or didn't ever really hear this part. And that is, but while he was a long way off. Do you remember that part? Maybe you do. While he was a long way off, his father saw him, just like our Heavenly Father. You can be close at hand, and you can be just like when Mom gave the hula hoop story. No matter where you are, God sees you long way off, short way off. He sees you, just like this father saw his son long way off. And I can think about, as a parent, and maybe this was going on for him, this father, that every day he'd wake up and every night he'd pray, I hope my son comes back tomorrow. I hope I see him tomorrow. And he was watching, and he saw him. Maybe it was the shape of him. He saw him a long way off. And that, to me, is one of the most beautiful parts of this story, but one I never saw before after 60 years. And so it goes on to say his father saw him, and then what? It was like, close the gates, lock the door, that kid's coming back for more money. No. He didn't send the brother out to tell your brother he's not coming in here. He didn't send the servants out to say, go get him and put him to work in the North 40 somewhere. No. He was filled with compassion. Now see, identify with that. Even though I have accused you all of being full of sin, I know you're also all full of compassion. Because I hear about you. And I hear about the compassion that you deliver in this community. And to your families. And you all have that emotion too, don't you? And so you can feel that father feeling that compassion for his lost son. His son that was separated from him. And the next really important part was this old man, not young like my dad, But this old man in this story took off running. He ran despite his age. That's how much compassion he had, how much hope, how much faith, how much desire he had to be close to his son again. He ran to him. Doesn't that fill you up? He ran to him, and then, he didn't just welcome back, son. He didn't work out a handshake and say, we'll work out some sort of financial arrangement. He threw his arms around him. Now that's a big hug. I got one of those from Gordy yesterday. He came and threw his arms around me. If I could only live like Gordy, and I don't know if you know of Gordy, but if I could only live like Gordy. And then he didn't just give him one of those little pecks on the cheek. That's not how I imagine the word kissed. He gave him a big old smack, maybe several. He was so happy and so filled for this lost son. And so the son, he's getting all this, but he still is humbled and he's still ashamed, and he knows his place. He knows his place, and so he starts to do what he planned to do. And he says, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And so then again, the father doesn't say, thank you very much. Now get to work. No, the father again continues to be surprising, and that's why it's surprising, because our normal human nature is not to do this, not to be filled in the same way. And that's the illustration of the father. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe. Now, I don't know about you, whether you use a robe at home to cover everything. You just get covered up. It kind of covers all the things that, like a t-shirt might show a little more lumps than a robe would. He grabs that robe, has the servants bring a robe to cover the inadequacies, to cover the stain and the dirt, to clothe him, to clothe his raggedy-looking son. And then he put it on him, and then put a ring on his finger. And what does the ring bring? The ring brings the father's identity to him. You're mine. This ring shows that you are mine. This ring gave the young man who had given it all away, it brought him back under the roof. You're mine, and you have authority here with me. And then he put sandals on his feet. I was trying to go barefoot on the farm yesterday, like I used to. Can't do it. But those sandals were so important to protect him, to guard him, and bring him back into protection and safety. And then, of course, he tells, bring the fatted calf. We're going to celebrate. We're going to have a big old party. This son of mine was dead and is alive, and he was lost and is found. And so let's celebrate. That's what it's all about. Let's bring him home. Now, in our verse reading, I didn't have read the last part of the story, this part of the verse. But you probably know it well, because then we have this other human emotion coming from the other character, that other brother, who'd been there all along, who had taken care of his father's estate, who was there every day to help his father, to run the place. And he, like all of us, got jealous. We felt that emotion too. We were jealous. Jealous. Maybe too much is given to somebody we know that should have been given to me, at school, give me this stuff. Why do they deserve it? And it made him mad. He was angry and he was full of rage. And what does the father do? He goes to him and he pleads with him. And he says these things, and they never impacted me again, another part of the story that never impacted me in the same way, because I learned something about Jewish law in preparing the sermon. And he says to the older brother, look, the brother says, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when the son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fatted calf for him. Have you ever said anything really angry like that? Probably. I'm just guessing. I'm not accusing. Just guessing. And the father says, my son. He's still his son too. You are always with me. And everything, I get this part, this is the part. And everything I have is yours. Now, when I've heard that before, I thought, oh, that's good. I was telling him, you're still my son. You're still in the fold. You're still under the roof. I love you just as much. But in Jewish law, in a situation like this, the land on the father's death, or the inheritance, would have been divided 2/3 to the older son. Remember, this is the younger son. So his share that he took off and wasted was 1/3. And so remember the first of the story, the father didn't keep the other 2/3 for himself. He divided it right then for both. He gave 1/3 to the younger son. And the son who's now complaining about it had already received his 2/3. But he was there taking care of his father. He was a good boy. But he still had, when the other son left, he still had everything that the father had left in his estate was already in the hands of the older brother. Now, maybe you've known that. I didn't know that. And I thought, how interesting that is. Because the father didn't just go on depriving of the older son through the time that the younger son was wasting away. He'd given him everything. And then I would guess that maybe the older son, although it doesn't say it, may have felt a little ashamed by that. I have given you everything. Don't sin against me now with your rage, but celebrate instead the return of your son. So this story just never seems to get old, does it? Or not for me. I see it playing out every day. I see it playing out among all of us many, many times. And it's such a good story because it gives us that feeling and knowing. As we look at this story, we can compare that one character, the Father, to our Heavenly Father. Well, I was thinking about this sermon, and from the last time I was here, I'm always listening to music. I love listening to music, and many of you do. But Anne Murray's song came on, You Needed Me. Do you remember that? Anybody even remember? Well, I know some of you remember. I'm looking at you. You might remember Anne Murray. But she had a song. Actually, I found out it was written by a man named Randy Goodrum. But there are so many lyrics in that, and I don't have all of them written down because part of it's more of maybe a human love verse. But some of those verses here that I'm going to read to you speak to me not only of this story of unconditional love in a way that I think about my own father or mentors, my mother, other family members, and friends that I've known, and maybe you will too. It says, I cried a tear, you wiped it dry. I was confused, and you cleared my mind. I sold my soul, and you bought it back for me. Do you know someone who's done those things for you? Or maybe that you have done for someone else? You held me up and gave me dignity. That's exactly what the Father in this story of the prodigal son had done for his son. You gave me strength to stand alone again. Can we only hope that in our lifetime with each other, before we meet the Heavenly Father, that we can do the things that the Father did here? 2, hold a hand when it is cold. And when someone is lost, you take them home. But most importantly, like the Father brings to us in this story, besides the showing of unconditional love, it brings us hope. And the words and the lyrics in that song is, you gave me hope when I was at the end. You called me friend. So as you leave today, think of your friends, your family, and your foes. Go sing along with Anne Murray and let someone know that you need them.